Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you're enjoying the content, please drop us up, drop a like, and let us know your thoughts below in the comments. Also, please consider supporting our podcast via the link below. It really helps us out. Gary, welcome to the World XP podcast. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned you're from Green Bay or Wisconsin area, and we've got some family that are from up there. Must be getting kind of cold. So for you, in your industry, doing the travel vlogging and all sorts of stuff, I don't know. Did you? Well, actually, let's do a quick intro for yourself. We'll do the question from the last guest, and then we'll jump into it. I had that thought that maybe you wanted to get away from the cold, but maybe that's just me. So if you want to tell the people who you are and what you do, and then we can hop right into it.
My name is Gary Arndt. 2007, I sold my home to travel around the world, and I basically traveled full time to almost full time for 13 years until the pandemic hit. And then I had to do a massive pivot, and I launched a podcast called Everything Everywhere Daily that has been pretty successful. It now gets about 1.5 million downloads a month. And a lot of it's a general knowledge and history podcast, but it's based a lot on things I learned and experienced during the course of my travels.
Very nice. So the question from the last guest, I think maybe this will be, I don't know. I think maybe I know what the answer is, but we'll see. Is what is the one thing in your life that gives you the most joy?
The thing that gives me the most joy. Uh, when I traveled around the world for the better part of a decade, I lived out of a bag, literally a bag. So I didn't have a lot of things. Uh, and I learned to kind of get joy from where I was at the time, um, what I was doing, things like that. If you had asked me this question a couple years ago, I would have said my Amazon Kindle because um, when I first started traveling, I would buy books, but finding English language bookstores in some countries was hard to do, and then they were incredibly expensive, and then you got to lug around books, and I didn't feel like throwing them away. So, but the Kindle changed everything. And to give you an example, I was going to be taking a ship from Cape Town, South Africa to the island of St. Helena, which is a 5-day voyage there. You're stuck in the island for 10 days, and then it's 5 days back. No internet connection the entire time. And as I was on the ship and we were pulling away from Cape Town, I'm like, oh crap, I have nothing to read. So I run up to the top of the ship, and my Kindle has a 3G connection. And I quickly go to the Kindle store and I download every Game of Thrones book just because I knew I could get all of they were really long, and I could probably milk it for the time I was going to be offline, and I downloaded them all before we pulled out. So but today, oh man, I don't know. Um, I use this a lot. My microphone. That's something I'm using every day. I think what the honest answer for most people would probably be is their smartphone. Although I don't use it for a lot of the things that a lot of people do. I don't. I'm not very active like texting people or on social media. I've taken all that stuff off my phone. But just as a general tool, I found it to be in the course of traveling. So I started traveling in between when Steve Jobs announced the iPhone and when it went on sale. And so I started traveling in a world that didn't have smartphones. And I remember later in 2007, I was in Tokyo and I bought an iPod Touch, which is basically an iPhone without the phone part. And it was like, oh my God, this just changes everything. This completely, all these devices I had, I can get rid of all of them. And it's only gotten better and better over time. So let's go with iPhone.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I like the Kindle answer as well. I think, well, you could probably speak to this as you go, but the transition between kind of the worlds that you were going around and traveling, like the world before you were traveling to the world where COVID stopped you traveling. Obviously, you would have been in contact with, come home into the US and see all the technological advances, but like, what was that like going into areas and maybe not having internet for a while, or maybe less wealthy countries, and then coming back and maybe 3, 6 months later, and all of a sudden there's like a new gadget? Like, did you expect that type of change as you went, as you sold your house in 2007 the first time, or did you kind of get used to it as you went? Because that was a super interesting point that you brought up.
Phones are by far like if you, I've always contended that if you were to like look at a photo or some on the street footage from 20 years ago, 2004, the world looks kind of the same as it does today. It's not
Hmm.
like the difference between 1960 and 1980 or 1940 and 1960. In the 20th century, you saw rapid changes over decades where the styles and everything look totally different. The biggest difference between today and 2004 is phones. Everybody has a phone, everyone's on their phone, and it's affected our lives. Um, and it really affected travel. It made it easy. You have a universal translation app. You can point your phone at something and get it translated. I can reserve a hotel as I'm pulling into a city. I can rent a car. I can get a plane. I can pull up a map. I can do all sorts of things that would otherwise be difficult. And it's gotten even easier than it was a few years ago. You can now get an eSIM. It used to be when I'd fly into London and Heathrow or something, I'd have to go to a vending machine, get a SIM card, put it in, and I got that little tiny little card, and you got to put it somewhere where you don't lose
Hmm.
it for years. That's not even an issue anymore. They have electronic SIMs. You don't even need to mess around with a little card. Um, Roaming has gotten a lot easier. When I first started, I would have to find a place that had Wi-Fi and it wasn't very good, or I'd have to go to an internet cafe. Internet cafes don't exist anymore because everybody's got a phone around the world. For most places, it's their own personal computer. Uh, so it, the world has homogenized a lot. Like you can go anywhere now and get pretty fast, wireless data
Yeah,
anywhere you go.
yeah.
Um,
I
unless you're in
want
a like a rural area, but you know, that's just more a matter of bringing the technology to those places.
Yeah, 100%. I want to backtrack a little bit to like how you got into because when we spoke on the phone before, you mentioned that you were one of the first or one of the first at least in the kind of vlogging space or travel vlogging space. So where did you come up with that idea to even say like, okay, yeah, this I'm just gonna leave my home and go around the world, and like how did you even come up with that?
Well, that was just kind of boredom. Um, I I had never traveled a lot as a kid. My family didn't do that. We weren't, didn't have a ton of money. Uh, I famously tell people I never saw salt water till I was 21 years old. Um, I started an internet company in the 90s. When I sold my company, I convinced the company I sold it to, which is a big global company, to send me on an around the world trip to their offices. And that was a 3 week trip. And as part of it, I made a website for the people back in the office. That was kind of an early travel blog. And I figured, well, I should do that for this as well. And it was just kind of a natural thing to do. And I just write about my thoughts about the places that I visited, and uh, it kind of took off from there.
When did you first realize that you could turn this into a business or like a living, so to speak? Like, were people starting to message you or email you and say like, "Oh, I really liked your post about XYZ place," or "How do you get a hotel in this country?" or like, how did that even start? Because, or like, I guess what I'm asking is, how were what was the feedback that you received where you thought, or was there a moment where you were like, "Okay, yeah, I can make this work from the standpoint of like I'm not going to be homeless and not be able to afford food anywhere I go."
When I first started, I spent about, well, most of 2007 basically crossing the Pacific Ocean. I did a lot of island hopping, and around Christmas of 2007, I was in Hong Kong, and I kind of had a come to Jesus moment where it's like, I'm spending a lot of time on this website, and this is either a waste of my time or I need to figure out how to turn it into something. And I didn't know what something was. Um, but I kind of doubled down, put a lot of effort into photography, grew a pretty decent audience. And this is before social media. Uh, Facebook existed, but it was still a thing for college students.
Hmm.
You know, Twitter hadn't really taken off. And literally, I was doing this for almost 3 years before anybody in the entire tourism industry even contacted me. And the first person to do it was actually, they invited me to come and speak at a conference in Valencia, Spain, because this one guy was pretty savvy with the internet, and he realized that there was this guy out there with the website, and he invited me in. And um, it's really been kind of weird because the travel industry is really always behind the times. It took them forever to accept the fact that people were using the internet. They were tied to newspapers and magazines far longer than they should have. And even then when they finally woke up to social media, they stuck with that, and they're still obsessed with that, even though a lot of these places, the algorithms don't show you stuff. They don't let people link out. Um, People are now starting to move to kind of more open source platforms. They're still, they don't do anything with podcasts. They don't do anything with email newsletters. So they're still kind of behind the times. Um, but yeah, it was a process, and the market for people traveling around the world has really become saturated, especially with the explosion of Instagram, where people just take pictures of themselves in front of places. Whereas when I started it, there were very few people doing it, and we all kind of knew each other.
Interesting. So at that point, so it was what, 3 years, 3 years in. So at that point, how many places had you been or documented at that point? Like, had you become, so I guess maybe what I'm getting at is when the tourism agency contacted you, was it what was it for? Or like what was the pitch from them?
Oh, to come in and just talk about the internet and travel.
And then
And
how did it go from there? So like was there a relationship built between you and that organization, or was that your first kind of, oh, I could make something of like the first bite at the apple, so to speak, for like, okay, there's something really here that's more than just we all know each other and we kind of travel, and maybe not that it's for fun, but like was that the first kind of big bite at the apple that had happened in the industry up to that point? Or like, do you know what I'm getting at a little bit? Was like this the
I
opening of the
was
door?
I was a traveler. I really wasn't part of what was going on in the tourism industry. And it
Okay.
wasn't until 2010 that it really dawned on me just how big this was. The amount of money that destinations spend on marketing, for example. And it was only later that I realized that a lot of tourism boards, especially at the national level, have tens of millions of dollars that they have to spend to promote their destination. And they do not have to show a return on their investment because it is impossible to show a return on your investment. If you're running an ad for Australia, how do you know if that ad actually made people go to Australia? And if somebody sees that ad and they do decide to go to Australia, that could be years down the road, right? So there's no way to tie A to B together. So what you end up, because there's no way to actually analyze the performance of your marketing money, what happens is a lot of it's just wasted, which is why I was saying that they're so far behind the time because they don't have to. They don't have to be efficient. They just need to spend the money someplace where they won't get fired.
I guess that, yeah, that does make sense. Did you have um an interest in history or travel when you were a kid? Like you mentioned, it was a little bit of a boredom thing, but you mentioned it at the top of the show as well that your podcast now is kind of history oriented as well. Um, was it only boredom that sparked it, or were you interested in some historical event or some maybe ancient civilization? You're like, oh, I really need to go see this place. And then to follow up to that one, as you're picking and choosing where you're going throughout your career, are there prior to that talk in Valencia, were there were they just places you wanted to go see, or was there a rhyme or reason for going to see them, or did maybe you were visiting a friend, or like how did you pick and choose where you went? There's so many places to go.
I don't know. I started by going west. I literally worked my way to Los Angeles, flew to Hawaii, started island hopping, and just kind of went to places that I found interesting. Yeah, I've always been a voracious reader. My dad had a subscription in National Geographic growing up that I loved, and today I have one of the biggest collections of National Geographic in the world. Uh,
Oh
you can
wow.
actually see it's a pretty sizable number.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and Yeah, so when I traveled, I made it a point to visit like UNESCO World Heritage Sites. I've been to over 400 in the world, which is a lot compared to most people. A lot of them very obscure. And so it was a natural thing. I've always thought of learning and history as part of travel.
Yeah.
To me, that's always kind of what it was.
So how did after the Valencia talk, how did your business evolve? And how did you evolve as a person as you were targeting different destinations to go to, were different organizations starting to reach out at that point after that talk was there? Or how did your, I'll say business model for lack of a better term, but how did that evolve after that?
It was slow simply because the industry was slow to adapt, but eventually I was able to make a living from it, especially due to the fact that you're not spending a lot of money. People think when you're traveling, you're spending a lot of money, and that's not necessarily the case. I was able to get a lot of my trips for free, especially some really expensive trips, like going to Antarctica and things like that, as kind of a brand ambassador. That part was easy. Getting people to actually pay you, especially early on, was difficult. Today, it's not as big of a problem. People are used to these brand ambassador campaigns and influencer campaigns and things like that. The business, strangely enough, it wasn't until the pandemic hit and I wasn't able to travel that the business actually really took off because I was able to put my effort into the podcast. And podcasting is just such a better business than blogging. It's not even funny.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned Antarctica. Is that the coolest place you've been? Or like what are some of what like I guess coolest and then also your favorite if maybe those are not the same in your mind, but what are some of those places?
Oh, what's cooler than Antarctica is actually South Georgia Island. South Georgia Island is an island that's between Africa and South America, above Antarctica. And most ships that go to Antarctica may stop there once or twice during the season. And it's always the highlight of the season for the crews that go there because they know that that's really the coolest place because there's so many penguins and seals and other things that you can see there that you're not going to see in Antarctica. Antarctica captures a lot of people's attention, but South Georgia is such a remote and difficult place to get to, and very few people ever go there, but it's really amazing. Man, it's hard to pin it down. I've been to so many places. There's a lot of great places that people just they don't know about. Most Americans they go to Europe, they're going to go to Italy, England, France, Ireland, and that's kind of it.
Yeah.
But they don't think to go to Montenegro or Malta or Croatia or Estonia or someplace like that. Uh, if they think of someplace in the Pacific, they're going to think of Tahiti, which is fine but ridiculously expensive, as opposed to going to the Cook Islands or the Yasawa Islands in Fiji or Micronesia or someplace like that. Um, so it really depends on what you mean by coolest.
Well,
Um,
your favorites then to visit.
like I said, South Georgia. When I get that question, I always say South Georgia, and I usually have a great photo that goes with it if I'm at a bar or something, because I had this image that I took of we landed on this beach and there were 250,000 penguins, and it's just
Wow.
penguins as far as the eye can see.
Wow. That's really cool. I don't Are the National Geographic kind of videos of penguins, are some of them often there, or is that more other places? Like, is that one of those unknown places that they put into films because you can get good shots?
If it's a king penguin, I wouldn't be surprised if they did it there. Um, there are penguins kind of all over the southern part of the world. You can see them in New Zealand and Australia, the Galapagos, South Africa. There are different species of penguin, so it really depends on what it is. But places like South Georgia, and there are other very remote, uninhabited islands in the Southern Ocean as well, are exactly the kind of places where they would film something like that.
That makes sense. So, okay, so you're going west, you flew to Hawaii, then Japan next maybe, or the kind of
No,
that, where'd you go next?
took me 6 months to get to Japan.
Oh, okay. Well, what was
From
in between
Hawaii, I
that?
went to Tahiti. From there, I went to Easter Island, back to Tahiti, then to the Cook Islands, then to New Zealand, and then from there to Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, American Samoa, back to Fiji, uh, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, the Solomon Islands, Nauru, Kiribati, back to Fiji, Hawaii, Guam, Micronesia. I'm sorry, the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Palau, and then the Philippines. And then from the Philippines, I went to Taipei, then Japan. I was in Japan, I think, around November 2007.
So when you're going back and forth to all these islands and stuff, well, I don't really know what I'm gonna. How was it, I guess? Like if for people that have no concept of like what it's like in the Pacific like island chains or the South Pacific, what is that sort of experience like? Because most of these islands are super small. Some people know what they are from like the island hopping of World War II, like Guam and places like that. But like what's it like?
They're not small, small. I mean, it's not like you can run around the island in, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Um, One question I'm often asked is, can you travel between the islands by boat? And for the most part, the answer is no. The Pacific is really big. This is not like the Caribbean, where you can often see the next island, you
Hmm.
know, going by sailboat from one to the other would not be very long. In the Pacific, you'd have to be on I don't know, a transport ship or something that was making runs between these islands to do that. And that's very difficult to do and usually not open to the public. Um, for the most part, with the exception of like French Polynesia and a few other places that speak French, everybody speaks English because they were colonized by the British at one point. Um, Weather is great. It's never too hot. A lot of people don't realize the only state in the United States that has never had a 100-degree day is Hawaii.
Oh,
And that's because when you're an island in the middle of the ocean can absorb a ton of heat. And you never, it can be hot and humid maybe in the upper 80s or even 90s, but it's not going to really get much hotter than that. And the flip side is it never really gets too cold. I remember I was in Tonga, Nuku'alofa, and I think the temperature got down to 68 and people were freezing. Like that was cold for them.
oh, okay. That's crazy. I know I have some friends that I play soccer with that are from the Caribbean that are like that. Um, okay, so you get through all these, then you get into kind of more, I guess Japan is not mainland Asia, but you get into Asia. At this point, and I'll ask this kind of in preemptive of the rest of your travels going westward, but how was it to kind of land in a place and then like the culture, the differences between the people, customs of the people there? Like there's different like hand gestures or whatever that might be offensive in one place and not in another. For example, it's a very simple example, but how was that for you to adjust? Like, especially pre-internet, like, were you reading and doing all research before? Or were you just kind of winging it, or like,
No,
how did that go?
uh, what you're talking about does exist, but it's vastly overblown.
Hmm.
Um, there are some places where like the OK symbol is the symbol for calling someone an asshole,
Yeah.
for example. And those things exist, but they're rather minor. For the most part, there's kind of developed a homogenized global way of acting that everyone sees movies and TV shows. It's not like it's not like 500 years ago when you're arriving in Japan on a ship with a bunch of samurai warriors. Um, Japan most definitely is culturally very different, uh, but I don't think so long as you're not making a scene, uh, there's not really going to be any problem in terms of any, uh, you know, things like that happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I was more using that as an example, but the follow-up that I was going to ask was, I guess it sounds like if you're just a generally decent person, then you're probably good wherever you go. Is that what you
And
found as well?
and people understand that you're a foreigner, so you might do something awkwardly, or it's probably not intended. A
Mm.
good example, I was in Thailand and I learned how to say hello. And this woman taught me how to say hello. And she said, Sawadee ka. Well, it turns out in Thai, how you say something. Now, normally in English and many languages, you change the words depending on who you're talking to. In Thai, it depends on who you are. So the way a woman would say hello is different than the way a man would say hello. A man would say sawadi kap as opposed to sawadi ka. And so I was saying hello like a woman. And, they knew, they understood. I'm not Thai. And eventually someone did point it out to me. Oh, you're saying it this way. You should say it that way. And I was like, oh, okay. Um, but it's not that big of a deal, really.
Yeah, that's good to know. I think because you sometimes you hear stereotypes of like people, especially in Europe. It's like, oh, these are obviously Americans doing stupid things. But I was always under the impression like if you were just a generally nice person that like it would be fine. And like you
Yeah.
said, people would understand.
And let me
Um,
tell you, there are a lot of Europeans that behave like trash too. It's just that they have their places they go near Europe where they behave that way, right?
hmm,
The bad reputation Americans have, it's because Americans are going to the Caribbean or Mexico usually because it's close and they can go there and they can go to these resorts where it's relatively warm. When I was in Bali and I told people that I was American and they assumed I was Australian. And when I said, no, I'm American, their attitude suddenly changed because to them, the bad tourists are the Australians because that's very close to Australia.
ah,
The roles would be completely flipped if it was an Australian going to say Cancun.
that makes sense. Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. Okay, so you get to Japan, and where were you there for a little bit? I think there's probably some cool place.
Over a
Or like,
month. I think I was there for like a month and a half.
okay, and then where did that take you after that, and slash or any cool stories from that portion of the trip or traveling, I
I
guess.
basically worked my way north. I went to Okinawa and then I went to Kirishima in the south. Went to an island called Yakushima. Worked my way north. Spent a fair amount of time in Tokyo, Kobe, Kyoto. Um, then I ended up taking a ferry from Fukuoka to Busan, South Korea. By the time I arrived in South Korea, it was December, and it was actually far colder than I thought it would be. And I really wasn't packed for cold weather because I just spent all this time in the Pacific. And so I left South Korea sooner than I had wanted to, and I ended up going to Hong Kong. And then I spent about 2 weeks there, and then I think from there I went to Brunei, and then Malaysia, and then I was in Southeast Asia before going to Australia 2008. And man, I have to look at the list.
I don't know.
Um,
Your memory is great. You listed them off like it's no problem. Um, okay, so at this point, you says 2008, so you've not yet been in contact with you've not done the Valencia talk. Is that correct?
no, that was still 2 years away.
Okay, so you're still traveling, and at this point, you continue to go west through. Do you go like around, get back to the U.S., like through Europe and Africa on this as well?
This first time around, I got back to the US around for the first time in maybe late 2009.
Okay.
I got back and I was visited my family before taking off again.
So after the Valencia talk, was it by your choice where you're traveling? I'm all over the place a bit because I went to your website and tried to look at the stuff that you had done, and I had so many questions that I'm just like going off what you're saying because it's super interesting and
I
like,
mean, it wasn't like something magic happened at this
yeah, yeah.
Valencia conference. It was just the first time somebody in the tourism industry had
Well,
bothered to reach
okay,
out to me.
fair enough. But it's oftentimes, right, people say if you're in sales, the first customer is the hardest one. So that's kind of why I'm using it as my own mental marker for like you within your own story. Um, if that makes sense. So okay, fair enough. Okay, so you're in Australia 2008 or so, and from there, like what? So from there, where are you going India, or like what route are you taking in that perspective? I guess I'll follow up with any super interesting
No, from
stories or
there I went
tidbits.
to Southeast Asia, and then from there I went to the Middle East,
Okay.
um, Egypt, a couple countries in Europe. Like I said, and then before arriving back in the U.S. in 2009 before taking off again.
Okay. And then okay, gotcha. Very nice. So then throughout, I guess, hmm, what are what's some of the craziest things that you've seen or notable stories that people would either people would find interesting or people would not believe that that they really happened.
2010, I was in Bangkok when there were these big political protests happening,
Hmm.
and there were hundreds of thousands of protesters in Bangkok. And one day they were going to go protest at the prime minister's house and dump blood uh, on like the gate to his house. And this was going to take place just a few blocks from where I was staying. So I got my camera and I go out, and I'm just this dude with a camera between thousands of angry protesters and hundreds of cops in full riot gear. And they kind of slowly marched down the street, and I was able to photograph the whole thing. That was a lot of fun. Um, I got invited by the U.S. Navy to visit the USS Harry S. Truman, which is a nuclear aircraft carrier. It was off the coast of Norfolk, Virginia. So I got to land on the carrier and get launched from the carrier.
Oh wow, that's
Um,
cool.
that was kind of fun. Um, I've been up to the Yukon for the Yukon Quest sled dog race, which is like the Iditarod but harder, and was able to meet and photograph a lot of the sled dog teams as they were up there. Went dog sledding myself several times. That's a blast. Um, Learned how to scuba dive while I was traveling. I've done well over 100 dives all over the world, from the Great Barrier Reef to the ruins of the Lighthouse of Alexandria in Egypt. Seen World War II, Japanese Zeros underwater in Papua New Guinea. Um, yeah, it's kind of hard to summarize a big chunk of my life in just a few minutes,
Yeah,
but
no,
there's been lots of stuff.
absolutely. That's why I've kind of all over the place a little bit with the questions because there's so many things that I've read and seen pictures and like, is there maybe another good way to or another good question to ask would be kind of, is there any place that you've been that isn't like all the pictures in the textbooks or the magazines or whatever, or someplace that you went that you're like, wow, this is much bigger or much cooler or much different than how I expected it to be.
Um, there's a lot of the most interesting things are the things that aren't in the magazines.
Oh,
If you
fair
ask most
enough.
Americans to name a city in France, they would have a hard time saying anything beyond Paris. They just don't know of a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Hmm.
There's a world of really cool things out there that most people just aren't aware of because it's not in popular media. Uh, I went to Dubrovnik in Croatia, which is a great place to visit, and then it became one of the filming locations for Game of Thrones. And so all of a sudden, everybody wanted to go to Dubrovnik. It became crowded. Hotel prices went through the roof. But just down the shore, not very far, is the city of Kotor in Montenegro, which in many respects is even cooler than Dubrovnik. But nobody's heard of it. And it's in Montenegro, which most people haven't heard of. And it's a really tiny country, but it's really cool. And it's really not even that far away. You could easily drive there in like maybe 1 to 2 hours from Dubrovnik, but they don't know about it.
Yeah.
Um, when I've talked to people about traveling in the Pacific, they've heard of Tahiti or Bora Bora,
Hmm.
but they don't know anything about the Cook Islands, which in many respects, again, is a lot cooler. But they only know what they know. So they want to go to these places that they've heard of simply because they've heard of it. And if they just expanded their horizons a little bit, they would find some amazing places that just a lot of people don't know about. And also, when a lot of people travel, they want to go impress their friends, and it's hard to impress people by going someplace that nobody knows anything about.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. There's also kind of, not that there's not pieces of history in those other places, but um, like the Tower of London or the pyramids or all like the places that everybody knows. There's like people want to see those things, like you said, because they know about them. But also, hmm, maybe to follow up to the places that nobody knows really about. Do you have like a top five list of places that people should go visit, whether it's as touristy or even as vacation spots that like
No,
the unsung ones? No?
there aren't five places in the world. The Earth is frickin' big. You can't narrow it down to just five things.
Or
Everyone
okay,
wants a
sure.
top 10 list, and it's all going to be depending on what you're interested in. You know, I could pick five things that are really cool within 100 miles of where I live. I could pick five things in the United States. A lot of the places that do get a lot of tourists, they are cool. If you're in Egypt, you should go to the pyramids. There's a lot of people that visit the pyramids, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't go there because there's a reason why so many people go there.
Hmm.
It is cool. Venice in the summer gets a ridiculous number of tourists, almost too many. But there's a good reason. You could go to Venice, just don't necessarily go there in the summer. Go there in the fall or the spring, and it's you're gonna have a much better experience. Um, People tend to go where there are large airports or cruise ship terminals. And just getting a little bit away from that, which may involve renting a car or getting on a train, is kind of one step too much for most people. Another good example in the Caribbean, my favorite island is the island of Dominica. Dominica is um, it's right between the French islands of Martinique and Guadeloupe. To get to Dominica, it's a very mountainous island, so they don't have a long runway, which means that you have to fly to a neighboring island and then take a very short flight to Dominica, like St. Lucia. It's not hard to do. Or there are also ferries that will take you there. Very easy to do, very cheap. But nobody does it because it's an extra step. Even though it's one of the most lush, beautiful islands that you're ever going to see in the Caribbean, they have these incredible hot springs and waterfalls, gorgeous island. But because there's that extra step, hardly anybody's going to do it.
Hmm. That's a good point. Okay, so I want to jump to your where the podcast started and kind of the thought behind that. But I want to ask you if there's anything that I should ask that I haven't asked. I've been top five question aside that I understand why people ask you that all the time. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should?
No, I everyone's going to have different questions about this sort of stuff. There's no right or wrong question.
Fair enough. Okay, so you're going through your travels, etc., and COVID hits. And is the podcast something that you had been wanting to start prior, you just hadn't been able to because you were traveling, or is this now a complete pivot? Or like walk listeners through the pivot from COVID. Was there plans beforehand? Were you kind of aware of it maybe a little bit, like into 2020, like, ooh, this might not be good for my business. Let me
I
start thinking of
started
some other things, or
podcasting in 2009. I was the co-host of a show called This Week in Travel, and I
okay.
did it while I was on the road traveling. I literally did it from waking up at 2 in the morning in Fiji. I actually called in once when I was a mile underground in a salt mine in Poland. Um, we did that for about 11 years until the pandemic hit and we had nothing to talk about anymore. I had an
Ah,
idea for
okay.
another show that I called Everything Everywhere. I had the artwork done. I had um, theme music already, and I bought the rights to it. I had it all ready to go. And the idea for the show was going to be like a 2 to 3 hour show on a single topic, and it'd come out infrequently. But then I realized as a business, it probably wasn't going to succeed. I put it on the shelf, and then when the pandemic hit, I realized I had to do something because in a 2 week span in March of 2020, I lost like 95% of my income.
Hmm.
And I went back to this idea, but instead of doing long episodes, I thought, well, what if I did short episodes and I did it more frequently? And that worked out a lot better. And the other thing I realized from travel is that most people only care about travel when they're about to go on a trip. You don't follow travel like you do sports or politics or technology, where there's new things happening all the time.
Hmm.
There's always another season, a championship in everything. Travel doesn't work that way. So I wanted something where people could follow it along, had nothing to do with travel per se, even, but I could still use everything I learned from traveling. And so I launched a daily educational show on July 1st, 2020, and I've been doing it ever since. And I'm about to do episode number 1600.
Wow, congrats. That's a lot of episodes. Been
Yeah, it is.
grinding. I think what there's some stat that most people don't even get past like two or three or something like that. 1600 is remarkable for sure. What are some of the things that you've learned over the course of uh doing the show, both shows, I guess? Some of the behind the scenes, maybe the evolution of the podcast space since like in 2009, people would be like, "What's a podcast?" I think my first one that I listened to was I stumbled across it by accident. I was listening to some like fantasy football podcast when I was like 12, and I completely by accident. I was like, "Oh, this is kind of fun." And then like I put it away, and then years later, when Rogan and all these other people start to take off and people know what the space is. But maybe what are some of the things that you've learned over the course of your experience podcasting, whether it's behind the scenes, the evolution of the space, anything of that sort of nature?
When a lot of people launch a podcast, it's like, oh, I'm going to start a podcast. And it's just kind of a thing that they do. And that's why most podcasts never make it to like episode 7. It's not a high priority because of the situation I was in the pandemic, having relied so much on the tourism industry and the tourism industry then just basically disappearing for the better part of a year. I had to make it work. And so I threw everything I had into it. So I was not just doing a show every day, but doing everything I could to promote the show. Every dollar that came in went right back into show promotion, buying ads on podcast apps, buying ads on other podcasts. And the show just kept growing steadily. And after about 18 months, then I saw real big increases in the size of the audience. And it's kind of been increasing ever since. And my very first couple episodes, I think maybe I had 200 people listen, which is actually a lot for a new podcast. And
Yeah.
that was simply because I had people from, the travel blog and from social media that had been following me. But today, uh, I've went from 200 in a day to I'll average about 53,000 in a day now.
Does that number ever like do you ever think about that number? Or you just like keep going on, like keep on keeping on with like how you've been doing it? 'Cause that's a lot of
Oh,
people. It's like,
there's room for enormous growth.
yeah.
The vast majority of people have never heard of my show. I know that they're based on other similar educational shows that the audience for what I'm doing is at least 10 times greater, possibly 100. So there's a lot of room for growth. Um, I'm just not in a position now where it's like, oh my God, I have to make this work. It's working. And now it's from here on out, it's just a matter of how big can I make it? And it's not as kind of a desperate situation.
Mm. You mentioned earlier that you don't really use social media. So how in terms of for you, well, I guess one when you got did you ever use it?
Yeah, I have
So
182,000 people that follow me on Instagram.
so when you got rid of it off your phone, well, not got rid of it, but when you don't like, did you notice a change in yourself about how you spent your time or anything like that, or were you?
Social media, for the most part, is a complete waste. Can you tell me the last 10 things you liked on social media?
Nope.
Nope, nobody can. So we spend all this time on stuff that's completely ephemeral. It doesn't stick with us. We have no attention. Uh, I was promoting my podcast on social media when I started, and then eventually I stopped, and I noticed it didn't affect anything at all. The way you grow a podcast is on other podcasts, like doing interviews
Yeah.
on podcasts or buying ads on podcast app because the audience will 100% be podcast listeners. They know how podcasts work. So it's pretty easy to use. But I don't miss social media at all. It's pretty vapid. It's not very interesting. If someone has something interesting to say, they're probably going to be able to say it in a longer form, like an article. So I think like Substack and email newsletters are far more interesting, and other podcasts where people can have an actual discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't disagree at all. The podcast format, I think, has opened up a lot of people's minds and kind of tapped into something that, at least the beginning stages of social media, when everything was like super short form, like 5 minute videos, 10 minute videos, whatever. Um, I think it's tapped into something that people are looking for sure. Couple last or final questions, I guess. And all your travels, and I don't want to maybe say boil it down to a couple of lessons, but like, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned? Whether it's from you saw somebody do something nice randomly on one area of your travel, or like you witnessed some like, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've taken away from the travels and the different people that you've spoken to, or maybe cultural things that you've experienced? Like, what are some of those? And then have you been able to incorporate those into your own life, or if not, also that's okay too. But what are some of
Biggest
the
thing I've
biggest
learned
ones?
probably is that the ability to adapt is more important than the ability to plan. A lot of people, they will go on a trip and they want to plan everything down to the hour. That does not work because something is going to happen at some point that is going to screw up your plans. And you need the ability to adapt. But not only that, you will enjoy it more if you're more flexible with what you're doing. And I think that's true with a lot of things in life. Even if it's a business, I'm not a big believer in business plans. I do think you need to have a rough idea of what is possible financially, kind of you know, within certain parameters. But what you need is a direction. And opportunities are going to come up that you did not plan for, that you need to be able to exploit. And problems are going to come up that you didn't plan for, that you're going to need to overcome. But either way, you still need to be working in your direction of growing what you're doing. And so having this ability to, adapt to what you're doing is more important than trying to execute a plan. By all means, have a rough idea, but that's just setting the direction that you're facing. And then from there, how you get there is going to depend on the circumstances that you cannot foresee.
Mm. Yeah, that's a very good. I like that a lot. Um, and last kind of maybe thought question. If you could give any piece of advice to like your 16-year-old self or your 20-year-old self, what would it be?
Buy Bitcoin.
That's a good answer.
I mean,
Uh, Fair enough. That's a good answer.
that version of myself would have no clue what that means. But the first time I heard it, I'd be like, "Oh, this is what he's talking about."
Yeah. Well, on that, what are your opinions on crypto generally? Do you have any, or you just know that it's gone through the roof
I have
recently?
a lot.
Yeah, go for it. What do you think about it? Do you think it'll be around for the long haul?
Uh, Not crypto, but Bitcoin. Yes,
Hmm. Go
crypto.
expand on that.
Well, crypto talks about a whole bunch of different assets, most of which are garbage.
Hmm.
Uh, if you look at the hash rates behind most meme coins, there's nothing there. It's just gambling. It's something that can go up or down, and that's all people do with it. And I know people that have lost their shirt trying to do that. Whereas with Bitcoin, if you just buy it and hold it, it'll keep going up. There's nothing even close to the computational power behind securing the Bitcoin network and anything else. If you look at other things like Ethereum and whatnot, priced per Bitcoin in terms of a ratio, it's just gone. I mean, Bitcoin's crushing it.
Yeah.
Um, that's why the notion of crypto, I mean, there are some stable coins like Circle and whatnot that I think will have a role to play, but that's not an investment vehicle. That's just going to be kind of a layer for transactions on the internet.
I guess on this topic actually, it sparked another thought. As you're going through different countries with different currencies and different things, like where do you see the future of money and all that going? Do you think Bitcoin will be used as a level of transaction, or well, or the stack of all the different money that you got? But what do you think is
All of this is almost useless. Um, Bitcoin is not going to be used for regular everyday transactions.
okay.
It's going to be something more like gold, which is something you use as a reserve for parking a store of value, not for buying a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
I think that's very clear at this point
Yeah, I
that
agree.
it simply cannot handle that many transactions. But at the same time, it doesn't have to. There can be other layers built on it or other blockchains that can facilitate those kind of transactions. And Bitcoin just needs to serve as a immutable store of value that other things can be built on.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And on the topic of that stack of money that you had, what is in your opinion, your most, or maybe can be more than one treasured possession or gift that you were given on over the course of your travels?
Oh man. Um, I got quite a few. I got a kava bowl from Samoa. That's where that big wad of money that I had, the bills were sitting in, and a ton of different coins. Um, this is a meteor
Oh wow, very cool.
that I got from a guy. Um, mostly it's to be honest, it's photography. It's photos that I've taken. I've got photos that I shot for my trips all over my house.
That's a good answer. It's almost like memories, kind of in a way. Well, Gary, I very much appreciate your time. I've learned a lot. I don't even know what else I want to ask you, to be honest. We've talked about so many things, and I think one of the things that you have shown, at least to me, is like there's no substitute for traveling experience and just seeing things and witnessing things around the world. I like, yeah, I don't really have a question on the end of that, but I guess that feels like a good place to wrap up. I don't know. Do you have any last kind of thoughts or nickels before we get you out of here?
No, I think I'm good.
Awesome. Well, tell the people where to go find your blog or your show.
Wherever you listen to podcasts, just look for everything, everywhere, daily.
Sounds good. Well, like I just said, Gary, appreciate your time, and for everybody listening, appreciate yours as well. And we'll see you guys next time. Peace.